What is going on, guys? This is Crozin, and welcome to my Shadowheart build. This one, I made her into a pure Cleric healer with the life domain. And yeah, Shadowheart, she is amazing. She probably has one of the best storylines, and she's one of my favorite characters in the game. And if you are looking for a healer for your party, Shadowheart can definitely fit that role. So in this build, we're going to go over her preferred starting stats, also some level upgrades that you get all the way up to level 12. We're also going to go over some of the best prepared spells to have, as well as your preferred gear setup. And then finally, we're going to go over some basic combat tips so you could get the most out of a pure healing build with Shadowheart. So these are the starting stats for Shadowheart, and we could make this a little bit better simply by customizing it ourselves and lowering our charisma down to 8. I find that you don't really need charisma with Shadow simply because you're going to be using all of the dialogue checks with your main character, not with Shadow. So having 8 charisma doesn't really affect her too much. And we can actually use these extra points to put into Constitution. Constitution will be one of her most important stats simply because of the Constitution checks that are required with concentration spells. And being that we're a healer, being that we're a spellcaster, we need high Constitution because we have a lot of concentration spells. And then also keep in mind that Wisdom is one of her most important stats, so we want to have this at 17 too. Now we have a choice between Strength and Dexterity, and I like to go for more of a Dexterity-based Shadowheart, simply because it raises your initiative and your armor class, and it just makes you a little bit better with finesse weapons. And I find that more useful than Strength with Shadow. And then finally here we can go for some skill proficiencies. There really isn't much you could do here. You could just go for History and Medicine. You won't need Persuasion since you won't be in too many dialogue checks. And then we could look at some of our cantrips. And you have to have Guidance. Guidance is her most important one here. It's going to affect basically every ability check, and it's just awesome. It's probably one of the best spells in the game. And then I also go for Light and Blade Ward here just to start out. And then as I discussed, we are a pure healer, so we will be going with the life domain. So now let's look at some of the level upgrades. The first main upgrade comes at level 4, and this is when you can select an additional cantrip. So I go for Sacred Flame, but you could also go for Resistance or Produce Flame. And then we also get our first feat, and this is where I go for ability improvements, and I just start stacking Wisdom at this point and getting it to 19. Our next upgrade comes at level 8, and this is where you can select an additional feat. What I like to do is I go right back into ability improvements, and I get my Wisdom to 20, and then also get 1 point in Constitution, but don't worry, that will be an even number by the end of this. At level 10, we get another minor upgrade where we can select another cantrip. So you could either go for Resistance or Produce Flame. Neither one of them are going to be too useful, but I think Resistance might outweigh the benefit of Produce Flame here. So either one works for level 10. Finally, at level 12, you get your last feat. And rather than going for ability improvement, I go for Resilient. And I go for 1 point in Constitution. And not only will I get 1 point in Constitution, but I will also gain proficiency in Constitution saving throws, which is going to be really useful for concentration spells. So I tend to pick this up at level 12 simply because of the way the stats are aligned. But yeah, as long as you have this, you'll be in good shape for Shadowheart. So another really important thing is to have a good variety of prepared spells. So I will go over some of my favorite spells from level 1 to level 6. I won't go into every single one of them in detail, but I will tell you some of the more important ones that I like to use. So starting out at level 1, you want to go for Guiding Bolt, Healing Word, Inflict Wounds, Shield of Faith. I also put on Bane and Create or Destroy Water. Your main damaging spells here will be Guiding Bolt and Inflict Wounds, and you also have Healing Word, which you can use as a ranged spell, and it's also a bonus action, so it's really good to have. For level 2 spells, I like to go for Warding Bond. I also go for Prayer of Healing. This is a really good out of combat healing spell. I go for Hold Person and then also Spiritual Weapon. Spiritual Weapon is a bonus action, so it's really good. And the only downside with this is that you have to make sure that you summon it near an enemy, so that way you don't run into its problem, which is that it has really low movement speed and basically low movement in general. So you have to make sure you're near an enemy, otherwise you might not be able to get to them in melee range. And so for level 3 spells, I go for Bestow Curse, I go for Mass Healing Word, and then I also go for one of my favorite spells in the game, which is Spirit Guardians. Spirit Guardians is a concentration spell, so you have to make sure that you have high constitution whenever you use this. And I just love running in with Shadow, going straight into a pile of enemies and having my Spirit Guardians do the damage for me. So it's a great spell. It's one of my favorites. Definitely recommend you guys to use that. And then level 4 spells, neither one of these are going to be too much of use, but I just put Banishment on for the sake of it. Level 5 spells, I go for Insect Plague and Flame Strike. Insect Plague has its uses depending on how many enemies are like piled up together. So sometimes I will use that, but the one that I always use, and it's one of my favorite spells in this game, it's Planar Ally. This thing is amazing. I definitely recommend you guys to try it out. I know it's a level 6 spell, so it's going to take you, I think, like level 12, maybe level 11 in order to get this. But it is so amazing. And yeah, I guess I could show you guys. That's one of them right there, a Deva. So you actually have the option to choose between 3 of them, 3 different entities. And I always use the Deva because this thing can also revive your downed allies. And it does great damage. And one thing that's really good about it, I guess I could show you guys, it could fly. And the range, the amount of movement that this thing has, I mean, it could just go from one side of the battlefield to the other. It's just an amazing summon, and definitely recommend you guys to try that one out. So the main thing with Shadow is you want to have a high armor class because that makes you harder to hit. So anything that's going to give you a higher armor class, that's what you want to prioritize. And I also enjoy having a shield on Shadow because it allows you to basically use a reaction. Depending on what shield you have, you could knock them down, cause recoil damage. There's just all different kinds of shields with different abilities. I recommend you to have one of those. And then another important thing, I went for the Reviving Hands. This is something that you could get later in the game, and it just gives you a nice buff every time you heal someone. And then another thing, which I believe this was really early in the game, it's Boots of Striding. And this thing is good because you can't get knocked prone when you have a concentration spell active. And this is really important. So definitely recommend you guys to be wearing that. And then another thing that I could recommend is something like this. This amulet's really good because it gives you a free spell slot restoration without having to long rest. And you could actually use this in combat. I believe, yeah, it's a bonus action, so it's really good. And you know, if you went for a level 6 spell or a level 5 spell, you could just regen that right into the next turn. So yeah, it's pretty simple here with the gear. Just go for a high armor class, and you're basically set. So I just wanted to show you guys a few combat tips here to end this video. And as you guys could see here, my party, they're kind of getting a little low on health, so this would be a perfect opportunity to use an AoE heal. And through the life domain, you actually have a really good AoE healing spell called Preserved Life. And this thing you could use twice per short rest, and it is just so good. So I guess we'll have to go down a ladder to use this. You kind of got to be on the same level whenever you use these AoE spells. And yeah, as you can see, most of my party is either like at close to halfway or just a little bit above halfway, so this should heal them up to the max. It's just a really good healing spell. And so we still have a bonus action to use here. So if you still needed more healing, you have that. You also have Shield of Faith, a concentration spell. or you could just summon Spiritual Weapon on top of our Deva that we already have summoned. So I'm just going to use Spiritual Weapon, and whenever you use this thing, you want to make sure you put it as close to your enemy as you can, so that way you can actually reach them. This thing has terrible range as far as how much you can move it per turn. That's the only downside to this spell, so you want to make sure that you're really close to your enemy wherever you summon this thing. And yeah, that's how I would start out in a situation like that. Now it's the Deva's turn, and usually I will summon this thing as soon as I leave camp. I won't wait until I'm in combat, because this thing can actually just follow you around wherever you go. And it's not going to get stuck like some of the bigger summons that say the druids have. So this thing just has incredible range that you can move it every turn. So I could actually use fly to get to the whole other side of the battlefield basically, and I could still get an attack off. And this thing actually does really good damage. Like, it does such good damage that you really don't even need Shadow to be doing any kind of offensive spells. So now it's Shadow's turn again, and there's a couple of things that we can do here. I'm not really looking to heal at this point since my party is almost fully healed here. So we could actually use some kind of offensive spell at this point, or a debuff. And I think I'm going to show you guys Spirit Guardians here. So Spirit Guardians, I like to use this whenever there's 2 or more enemies that are clustered up like this together. And Spirit Guardians will actually work as long as they are near this aura of the Guardians going around in circles. Every turn this will damage them. So a lot of times I will just move Shadow to wherever these guys are, and even if there's an enemy that's like further away, I will just move into that range and keep him there, and then the next turn it'll still damage him as well. So there's a bunch of different options that you could have done there. I mean, you could have used Bless. Bless is a really good spell as well, and it's a concentration spell, so you always got to make sure that you only use one of these, because if I tried to use another one, then this one would get canceled out. So as long as you have good constitution, you should be able to at least keep this thing up for generally a couple of turns. You know, sometimes you might get unlucky and, you know, this might break pretty early, but most of the time it'll last you most of the fight, if not all of the fight. So this is the last turn, and now I just kind of want to go over some other very important spells that you guys have here. And one of them is also under the channel Divinity, and it is Turn Undead. Turn Undead is really good whenever you are facing undead enemies. It's something that you always want to use whenever you are up against a horde of undead enemies. This thing has a nice little AoE range, and it's just really good. Trust me, anytime there's undead enemies, make sure you use Turn Undead with Shadow. But in a situation like this, another good spell, if you ever wanted to use some kind of buff, Aid is a really good buff. And the further you go into this with the levels, it'll give you more hit points for all of your party. So if I went for a level 5, this would give my whole party not only a little bit of healing, but it will give them 20 extra hit points basically until you long rest, which is really good. It's a really good spell, so just make sure that you always use Aid on top of all of the other spells that I'm showing you. So yeah, other than that, we're basically done here. I should be able to just run into this guy, and that's it. So I hope this video helped you guys out with turning Shadowheart into a very powerful healer. And yeah, Life Domain is great. I mean, it has great AoE healing spells. And not only healing though, you guys could see, I mean, it has great utility, great buffs, great summons, great damage. It's just an all-around very good cleric build. And I know there's a couple of other good subclasses, but if you're looking for a straight up healer, Life Domain is the way to go. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you later.